Hi, my name is Miriam, and this is the Black TV Show podcast. This is where I talk about my favorite TV show episodes. Currently talking about season 2 of The Cosby Show. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 26, The Cosby Show season 2, episode 2, The Juicer. This episode aired on October 3rd, 1985. So we start off with Theo is looking at the fridge for a very long time. You wonder, what is he looking for? Is he looking for some kind of food or something? For me, when I am looking for food, sometimes I do open the fridge for a while and just stare. Instead of taking things out, you'd rather just stare at it and be like, what do I really want to eat? So he is staring for a very long time. And so Cliff comes in and asks, did the air conditioning break down? He's like, no. He was like, are you hot? He's like, no. So then Cliff goes to him, beside him, and looks at the fridge wondering, like, what are we staring at? And so then Theo's like, what are you looking at? And Cliff was like, well, I'm wondering what you're looking at. That's why. And Theo's like, well, I'm looking for food. That's, usually the case why people just stare at the fridge. They want to look for food. So Cliff closes the fridge door and says, you know what? The power company thanked me for, running up the bill for the electricity. And so now Cliff knows who caused that issue. And so Cliff was like, we can take a photo of the fridge, put it up over like with a magnet, and you just stare at it until you find what you want, and then you open the fridge, grab the food, and then you're good. We don't want any penguins coming. And that was just random. I didn't understand that. And so then we see Rudy and Peter come in, and, of course, we saw Peter on the episode of Slumber Party. So he is back with his, usually not talking. He never talks, it feels like. And so Cliff, asks him, Peter, my man, how are you doing? He was like, good, with a thumbs up. And then Cliff was like, how's the wife? And he gave the okay. I was like, he doesn't got a wife. He's only 5 years old, or I guess 6 in this case. Cliff gets out his juicer. He just bought this from the store. And he says, this is only for him and no one touches. And he tells Rudy that you do not touch this, do not touch this, do not touch this. Basically repeating it, And Theo asked, how much was it? And Cliff never said what it was. And so so Rudy was like, how does this work? So Cliff shows her what it is. It's a thing that, you juice vegetables. And so he showed the example with carrots, and he started putting them in, and, it came out as carrot juice. And Rudy and Peter was like, vegetables? No, put ice cream in there. And Cliff was like, no, why would I put ice cream? This is for vegetables. And they were like, no, we don't want this. And they didn't want the juice. And Rudy asked if she can play upstairs. And Cliff was like, yeah, but do not play around, basically. Do not go, running up and down the stairs and all that stuff. So they're like, yeah, we know. And so they go. And Claire comes in and was like, oh, no, another appliance. And Cliff tries to get her to drink the juice. And she says, the juicer is just going to end up in the appliance graveyard, which is under the stove, apparently. And they showed the waffle maker, the crepe maker, the sausage stuffer. Never heard of what a sausage stuffer is. I don't eat sausage, so I wouldn't know this. But it always ends up in the the graveyard. And so Claire tells Theo, make sure you have room for the juicer because it's going to end up there. And so, which is so funny. This is a common theme throughout the series of him buying things just because they're nice and shiny, and they're like gadgets, and it's cool. And I'm that type of person especially when I was younger, it was when you see a commercial and it's like, whoa, you can make food out of an easy bake oven, or there was how you can draw this, you can create this from this little thing. It's they get you, so I understand what she means about that. So then we see Peter and Rudy playing upstairs in the hallway, and they're making lots of noise, and Vanessa comes out and tells them to stop doing that because she is reading. And so Claire comes in and says she's going to the post office, and asks if Vanessa can watch both Rudy and Peter while she's gone to the post office. And Vanessa's like, yeah, for sure. And so Vanessa is in charge, and Vanessa points that out to Rudy and Peter. And all of a sudden the phone rings, and she's like, oh, I'll take it. And so she goes into her parents' room and picks it up, and we end that scene right there. We go to Cliff's office in the basement, and he's showing a guy about this water stain that's on the wall, and it's running down the office. And by the way, the guy that's playing this character, this is now his third time we're seeing him in the series playing a different character. He, as I said, he was in Claire's case episode. And he was in that episode, that backdoor pilot episode. I can't remember what the name was, but it's crazy that they are repeating him. Like, dude, like, if you want him to be in the series, just make him as a recurring character. Like, I don't understand why they keep bringing him in as different characters. That's not right. Clearly, then they couldn't find someone to play this part. Clearly, that's the point. And so then we see the guy, so the guy says the house could fall apart, you really need to get that fixed because the water stain might, it's a water stain now, but it can cause like cracking in the walls and all that stuff. And he estimates that it can cost anywhere from $75 to $1,200. That is not an estimate. Like, an estimate should be not big of that range. And so Cliff even says, like, that's an estimate? Like, it's such a big range. Like how do you budget for that? That's not how you should do that. And what's crazy is I was listening to an episode of The Breakfast Club, which is a radio station in New York, and they were talking about contractors. They say that they're going to do something for this estimate, and then they go over the price. It seems like that's the case in this situation. And so this guy, who we find out that his name is Mr. Lucas. He says that contractors are like doctors. You gotta fix an issue, not knowing how to solve it. Because with being a doctor, it's a practice. Practicing medicine, you're always learning on the job how to practice medicine, basically. So he's basically saying contractors practice also. So you just have to figure things out. And so Claire comes in, and Mr. Lucas says, oh, the water stain isn't your fault. And Cliff was like, how do you know? How would you know? And so Claire mentions that she's going to the post office and left Vanessa in charge. And Cliff was like, yeah, I'll go up once this is over. And so she leaves, and Mr. Lucas asked Cliff, how did he end up with a woman like that? Cliff was like, I was just lucky, I guess. And Mr. Lucas says, sure, you surely were lucky. And Cliff looks like, what? You don't, like, in a way that, like, he can't get a woman like her. Like, it was funny the way he reacted, because he just said the lucky part. He didn't really, like, mean it. And then to hear Mr. Lucas say, like, you sure were lucky is, like, kind of like a diss, basically. And so we go back to the parents' room, and Vanessa's on the phone talking about some note and we find out about Robert. He will be in this season. I believe he comes in for the Halloween episode, and he's gonna be like the love interest for Vanessa. But they're talking about a note that Vanessa wrote that ended up going to Robert, and a whole bunch of things added in. It really didn't make sense to me. And so then Rudy and Peter comes in and says that, they're bored, and Vanessa says, like, I'm on an important call. I don't think this is an important call about a note. Like, really? That is not the case. So Rudy asks Vanessa, like, what can we do? You're in charge. Like, you tell us what to do. And so finally they get to the point where, Rudy says she wants a snack, and Vanessa says, I'll make you a snack in a minute after this phone call. So Rudy and Peter, they go out and wait for her. And so then, a minute goes by, and Rudy and Peter says they're hungry, and they decide to go to the kitchen. We get to the kitchen, and Rudy gets the peanut butter, runs to the fridge to get it. Peter gets the bread, but he drops the bread on the ground. And it's not like one bread is on the ground. The whole loaf is on the ground. Like, really? Really? So to get rid of the germs from what that bread touched to the ground, he rubs it on his body, where there's more germs already. Like, what is this? He's rubbing it against his, I guess, sweater or something. And if you watch this particular clip, the audience is laughing like crazy because it's so funny. And so Peter was like, we need jelly, and we need jelly. And so Rudy was like, she goes, checks the fridge and finds out there isn't jelly. And so Rudy says, let's make jelly. And like, Peter's like, how? With the juicer. And so the juicer is currently plugged in with the top off. And so I don't know, I didn't realize that jelly, were they making, like, I didn't know the grape jelly was a thing. So she grabs grapes and puts them in the juicer. And so, and without the lid closed. And she turns it on, and it squirts everywhere. And all of a sudden, Peter and Rudy start screaming, and Peter starts booking it out the door, running it, like, and I feel like there's other episodes where he runs too. This is the first episode that we see him running out, and he runs out and leaves the house, goes to his own place, and there's a huge mess in the kitchen, and Rudy runs into her room, and that's the end of Act 1, and we go into Act 2, and Theo comes in from basketball and sees this huge mess, and Denise comes in from, I believe she mentions Jeanette's, that's her friend. And I feel like we're going to hear that name a few times. I don't know if we actually meet a person named Jeanette. But, so Denise was like, I guess we should clean this up. And Theo was like, well, if Rudy did this, then we don't touch it. Let her clean this up. It's her, we got to teach her responsibility. If we clean this up, she will never learn about responsibility. And also the fact that, like, Mom and Dad would not, or like Cliff and Claire would not know that this happened if they cleaned it up. So Theo goes in and gets some food real quick, and then we cut to Cliff coming from the office to the living room with Mr. Lucas, talking about fixing the water stain, and that he also has a cracked sidewalk and should get that fixed too. And Cliff was like, yeah, whatever, I know you're trying to get money out of me, basically. And so then he says bye to Mr. Lucas. And when he closes the door handle is very sticky. And he's just wondering, like, why is the door handle so very sticky? And so he goes to the kitchen, and right away Denise says, it wasn't us. It's like the, from the Shaggy song, it wasn't me. Like, that's how she was like, it wasn't me. And so Cliff was like, huh? Like, and yet you're just sitting here. And so Theo says, like, we didn't touch it because it has Rudy all over it. And Cliff was like, he really looks at Theo like they're stupid. Like, how are they eating right now and not cleaning up the mess? And so Cliff asks, like, what are you thinking? What do you think I'm thinking? And I forgot what he said, but basically Cliff mentions that, you guys are all having a picnic while there's a mess in this kitchen. And Theo tells Cliff about the whole responsibility that Rudy would never learn. And so then Claire comes in and sees the mess, and Cliff was like, it wasn't us, like the song. It wasn't me. And so Denise asks if they should clean up the mess. And Claire was like, no, if Rudy did it, she should clean up the mess. And Cliff looks confused. He's like, what? Like, I don't understand, why aren't these two children that are just chilling not having to clean up the mess? And so then they leave, Cliff and Claire, and Theo says, I will make a great father one day. And I'm like, what? No. And so we get to the parents' room, and Vanessa is on the phone still, and Cliff and Claire come in. And Vanessa, like, puts the phone down and says, can I stop watching Rudy and Peter? And Cliff was like, when have you been watching them? And so Cliff takes the phone and tells Courtney, Vanessa will get back to her. She can't talk right now. And Claire asks, where is Peter and Rudy? And Vanessa says, I guess out there. That was where they were before. And Vanessa said that she had to take this important call. And she was saying that the call was Courtney said Darnell had a secret note to rob her, but she never signed the note, so someone forged her signature. And Claire was like, Rudy and Peter are way more important than a note. That is so true. honestly speaking, that is actually a true thing. To leave kids by appliance, they can really hurt themselves, and really endanger themselves. And you don't want to be in the case where it really does something like kill them and all that stuff. So it is an important thing that she did, that she didn't do, and she should have. Of course, she has to be in trouble for that. And so Vanessa asks, is Rudy in trouble? And Cliff was like, well, she's one of the two people that are in trouble. And Claire tells Vanessa to go to the kitchen to see the surprise that's waiting for her. And then the phone rings, and it's Peter's mother. And Peter found her mom. His mom found her. His mom found him standing up in the clothes hamper, and said, "All I did was hold the bread." That's so funny. Like, he's like, all I did was just hold the bread, and he's probably crying and all that stuff. And so Claire was like, I'm gonna go find Rudy. And so she goes to Rudy's room, and you see Rudy's trying to hide the yellow shirt that she was wearing when the juicer accident happened. And so Claire goes in, and Claire asks Rudy, like, where's Peter? And she said, oh, he went home, but he didn't do anything. And I didn't do anything. That really makes it obvious that she did something. Like, you don't say that. Like, no. And so Claire goes to the drawer and sees the messy shirt and says, what has happened to your clothes? And she doesn't speak and goes to her bed. And Claire asks Rudy, or tells Rudy that there is a mess in the kitchen. Do you know anything about it? And Rudy just didn't really say anything. And then eventually she says that, Theo did it. And Claire was like, no, I don't think Theo did it. And then she says Vanessa did it. And then Claire was like, okay, none of your siblings did it, but you should tell me the truth, because no matter what, I still love you. And I love that she said that, because it's like, the reason why I feel like a lot of kids lie is because you're afraid of, first of all, disappointing your parents. But it's like, if you do something bad, they're not going to love you. And it's like, that's what you're really worried about. And I love that Claire said that I will always love you, even though you did something bad. And I feel like a lot of parents should take note about that, because you got to understand, when a child does something bad and they're so scared to tell you why, it's because they're scared that they're not going to get the love back that they usually do. And so Rudy was like, I broke Daddy's juicer. And Claire tells Rudy that, machines are dangerous, they can hurt you. And we've told you that you're not supposed to touch it. And you touched it anyways. And Rudy says, I'll never go in the kitchen, And Claire was like, no, I want to see you in the kitchen. I always love seeing your face. So, this was such a cute moment in the episode. It was so cute. As I said, Keisha was so cute back then. And so then Claire tells Rudy that, she has to tell Cliff what happened. And Rudy's like, no, I don't want, why don't you tell him? And she was like, nope, you need to tell him what happened. So we're in the kitchen, and Vanessa's cleaning, the island part, the top part. And Vanessa asks, is Rudy going to help? And Cliff was like, yeah, she's going to help. And mentions that Vanessa's doing the high part of the mess, and Rudy's gonna do the low part of the mess. And Vanessa says, I only left them for a minute. Yeah, right, girl. No, you left them for so much longer. And even Cliff was like, imagine if you left them for a minute and a half. It's so funny. And so then Rudy comes down with Claire, and Claire calls out Cliff, and Cliff comes out, and Rudy hides, and Claire was like, no, you need to come out and say sorry. So Cliff sits down, and Rudy goes and tells him, I'm sorry, I broke your juicer. And so Cliff was like, is this the same juicer that I said do not touch? And she was like, yeah. Is it the same juicer that I said mine? And she was like, yeah. And so Cliff was like, well, you're going to be needing to clean the lower part of the kitchen, and you got to do that now. So they gave each other a kiss, and she goes into the kitchen, and and the way that he said to her, that she's like sentenced to doing the lower part of the kitchen, he said it in such a lawyer way, saying that, she's guilty. And so Claire takes out her lawyer hat. So Claire says, Dr. Huxtable, there was an accomplice, or I can't even say the words, of, there's someone that helped her with this situation. And Cliff was like, oh, you're talking about Vanessa? She's in there. And Claire was like, no. So Cliff was like, oh, he's still in the clothes hamper. It's speaking about Peter. And Claire was like, no. And so she says, who was one who left the juicer plugged into electric socket with the top off? And of course that was Cliff. And so Claire gives Cliff a 5-year appliance probation of him not buying any appliance, which is impossible because we're gonna see him throughout this series, and 5 years would be in season 7. We're gonna see it more times by the time it's season 7. So this whole thing doesn't apply for the series. And so then we end the episode right there. So we had 2 guest stars. We had Peter Costa playing as Peter. I like how with the kids, they always actually go by the kid's real name. Because you remember that Slumber Party episode? Majority of the kids that were in that episode, that was their actual given name in real life, except for Alicia Keys. But with Peter, he has his name, Peter. And then we have David Lingston playing Sam Lucas. As I said, this is now the 3rd time playing a different character, which I don't like. And clearly there was an issue in the 80s of finding new and up-and-coming talent of Black actors, so I just really don't like it. And so the lesson is never touch appliances that do not belong to you. And the question I have for you guys is, have you ever tried an appliance or something you were told not to touch and you did it anyways? Let me know using the hashtag #TheJuicer at Instagram and Twitter at Black TV Shows Pod. I hope you're loving the episodes. Make sure to, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, to give me a 5-star rating and a great review. And the next episode is episode 27, season 2, episode 3, Happy Anniversary, in which this is one of the most memorable episodes of the whole series. So I can't wait to talk about that. See you on the next one.